Welcome to episode 37. Did you think that little jingle at the beginning started a little bit racy? Did you notice that?
Racist?
No, racy. Just a little bit. Anyway, welcome. I'm TV. He's Oscar D'Souza. This is Property Avenue WA, and our focus is all about matters property in Western Australia. And we've got some really interesting stuff to talk about this week, particularly. The focus is going to be on Oscar because that's his specialty, property management. So we're going to talk about rental. We obviously the moratorium in WA for rental with the rental world is coming to an end in March. So we'll have a few questions to ask Oscar about that, so far as what it all means. What will the landlords be doing, or what should they be doing? What would they be planning for? What about the tenants? What are the sort of things that they need to consider at this point? Not wait until March. Perhaps there are things that they need to address now. And what about those that are looking at investment property? Where do they go? What do they plan to do between now and then? If you've bought a property for investment purposes, where does that put you with regard to the moratorium? And interestingly enough, there was also an article I picked up on during the week, OD, about there was an announcement by the WA government to assist the landlords insofar as how that will help them, and that money they're utilising is basically the balance of money. I think they budgeted for something like 30 million, of which only 6 million was used for tenancy. So they're utilising that money to assist the landlords, and perhaps we can touch on that. Also, there's many other points of interest that we may raise with regard to rental property and the investment market. Of course, we'll have a bit of a snapshot of what's been going on for the week as far as the property world is concerned. And if we've got time, some articles of interest with regard to what tickled my fancy, I picked up on 10 gadgets that will change your life and your world. I just thought of something different. Oscar got a bit sick of my sheds last week, so I thought I'd go somewhere different. And the other article,
I think everyone got a bit sick of your sheds.
Oh no, I saw some good things. But there was another thing too, another article I picked up on.
It's just
and
bullshit.
I reckon the new segment we could have newspaper headlines overseas from around the world. And Denmark is offering a 0 interest rate fixed for 20 years. So there's some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So, mate, welcome. Good to see you. How was your week?
Yeah, good to see you too as well, TV. Yeah, look, it's I guess every Tuesday. It's early in the week, but I get to Tuesday and I get to Tuesday evening. Yesterday I had a bit more of a busier Monday than I normally would for a Monday, and Tuesdays are always crazy flat out. So I'm feeling it a bit, mate, in terms of just, I don't know, a little bit worn out, and certainly the humidity and heat doesn't really help that either. But when I put on my big girl pants and I have my little whinge, and then I get on with what we're actually here to do, I'm good as gold, mate. So, and really looking forward tonight to discussing the rental market. It's a very hot topic. Whether you like real estate stuff or not, everyone knows someone somewhere that's renting a property or that's wanting to rent a property. And what's going on in the rental market in WA really does affect just about everyone, and some people a little bit more intensely, I guess, than others. So I really look forward to discussing the rental market and where we see things going over the next couple of months, which with, as you rightly pointed out, the lifting of the rental and eviction moratorium, which is around about 6 weeks away, I think, towards the end of March.
Hey, listen, I will digress just quickly. But I came up to Geraldton late last week to see my dear mum and do a few things and see a few people and try and do that. But I went down to the beach this morning because I'm with you. It has been stifling here in Geraldton. I don't think the air conditioner has even been beneficial at times. But I went down the beach this morning, unbelievably just glorious. It was just, this is the surf beach, was glassed off. The water was crystal clear. There's a little bit of weed, but there was a few people out there surfing, or I don't know whether you call it surfing because they wouldn't call the waves. But I tell you what, it was like, I saw you put a post on earlier in the week about Nusa Dua. Well, I should have taken a photo because the beach here in Geraldton, the surf beach here in Geraldton, it was a bit like that. It was just magnificent. It reminded me of those walks along the beach. So there are some pluses. And as we say, we all have a little whinge, but boy, oh boy, we're not doing it too bad at all. Except if, unless you're a tennis player, they're a bit sooky, aren't they?
Mate, it's far out. And a couple of things I caught on the news just before. One is obviously just going back to the weather, and we're set for WA's hottest January on record, and that's largely because, and I didn't catch why, but largely because we've been missing the Freo doctor over the course of the whole of January. So we haven't had that sea breeze that would normally lighten or cool down the mood in the afternoons. And the reason why, I don't know, because I didn't catch that bit of the story. But you referred to the tennis. Far out, what a debacle that is in terms of it is what it is in terms of the COVID, the restrictions and the quarantining. But then you get people like Bernard Tomic's girlfriend, I think it's her, jumping on and making a representation about something that she just doesn't do and it's not good enough. She doesn't wash her own hair. And I would think that if you're prepared to voluntarily jump on Instagram or Facebook and put that sort of a post on, you've got to expect that there is going to be a bit of community backlash, because many people around the country, outside of Australia, and even those in quarantine, sometimes have to wash their own hair. So it's not the hardest thing in the world to do, but maybe she deserves everything she gets.
Never mind. But talking about the heat and talking about rental properties, that's got to be an issue too. I mean, you've had those terrible fires down there at Kwinana, down that way. So the heat's impacted people and it's impacted property. And they are things that, boy, it'd be nice to get someone on board to talk about that sort of stuff, or at least identify what's been going and the impact that's having on people. But those sort of things, we talk about the heat. What about the situation with people, and this is a question without notice, but when you've got a rental property and suddenly air conditioning and things of that nature come into play, what's the situation there as far as the landlords and their responsibilities with regard to servicing and ensuring those things are all in order?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So emergency repairs are things that a landlord must attend to within 48 hours of receiving. It depends on the emergency, but sometimes it's within 24 hours, but often it's within 48 hours that they have to initiate something if there is an essential service or what's considered an emergency repair. In just about every single case, though, air conditioning does not fall into the emergency repair category. So we all love our air-conditioned homes, and we're very used to it in WA, and particularly in the northwest as well. But if an air conditioner goes on the blink, whilst it might be highly, highly uncomfortable for those that are in the property, that isn't actually considered an urgent repair under legislation. So
it is or it is not?
It's not.
Right.
No. Electrical issues, gas, any safety issues as well, running water. That obviously is an essential repair because it's an essential service. But air conditioning is a bit of a luxury item, and if the air conditioner doesn't get fixed straight away, the tenant doesn't really have much of a case against the landlord. That said, landlords should be doing everything they can to provide the level of accommodation that the tenant signed the lease for and is paying the rent for. So there is probably more a moral obligation to get the property back to operating with a proper air conditioner or a fixed air conditioner as soon as possible. But many air conditioning contractors at the moment they haven't got time to scratch themselves, for obvious reasons. Things break down, and we've just had some very, very hot weeks over the last couple of months.
Yep. Mate, we'll get to the rental bit in a minute, but just a snapshot of what has been happening in the property world this past week. How have we been going?
Yeah, look, without trying to sound like a broken record, again, another very strong week, both in the sales arena and then also in the rental arena as well. But what I would say is I'd reiterate the comments that I made probably over the last 3 or 4 weeks and each week, and that is I think that both markets are starting to taper off a bit. Certainly, so far as the rental market is concerned, I really do think that, and we are absolutely at crisis point. Let me be very clear on that. It's going to get worse over the next couple of months in terms of the rental crisis that we've got. But I think in terms of that level of supply that we've got of rental properties versus the level of demand, that really has remained consistent for the last 2 to 3 months. So it doesn't seem that now we've got any far greater level of demand that has increased over the last 4 or 5 weeks. That also seems to have remained consistent, and I think that largely is because the borders are effectively shut, which means we're not really looking at a whole lot of migration of people coming to relocate into WA. So all of the rental demand really, or most of the rental demand, is coming internally within our state's borders, and that's absorbing the supply. So the sales side of things, there's definitely not enough listings around the place. You talk to any real estate agent, and you take the real estate agent talk out of them, but there's just not enough listings around, and there's a lot of demand. There's lots of people with money, and they've got great borrowing power as well, because interest rates are the lowest in living memory. So there's very good reason why it is time for buyers to get out there and do their thing, but they are absolutely struggling because there's not enough properties available for them to buy. Just over the last week, another 763 properties in the Perth metropolitan area have sold. 4 weeks ago, that was 936. So it's a bit down there. But again, it's not because the market's slowing down. It's because there just isn't the supply there. And this time last year, 547 properties. So again, 500 to 600 properties per week is a very typical market, and we certainly had that 12 months ago. But this, the last 6 months, every week we're seeing that we're in excess of 800 sales, and I think our greatest month was about 1,240 sales or something. So very, very high demand market. Supply is definitely on the low side. Just over 8,000 listings available in the Perth metropolitan area, and 12 months ago there was over 12,500 listings. So massive drop in supply there, and very, very strong demand. So that's it so far as the stats are concerned. I've got some stats for
Can I just interrupt quickly? One thing that was really interesting that I picked up this afternoon was an article. It was a Reserve Bank analysis, and they were suggesting that the confidence by borrowers in the low interest rates, they can see property values increasing by 30% over the next 3 years. Now, I suppose, as we always said, and the reason why we do this program, Property Avenue WA, is to focus on WA. I'd be interested to see, remembering when the pandemic came about in March last year, the headlines was the fact that values of property were going to drop by 30 and 40%. And of course, you look closer behind the headlines, and it was more focused on New South Wales and Victoria. So I wonder, with regard to those 30%, I didn't get the full details of the article, but 30% over 3 years, that's not in 12 months. But what their reasoning behind that is the fact that there's that fear of missing out coming into play again, which we made mention of in the last week or two, the last couple of episodes. And of course, that's playing mind games on people, which is driving people into action to go in to do that. So the question was asked to me earlier on this week to sort of say, well, TV, why is this happening? What's creating all that? There's a number of factors, but here's a classic. Here's a classic that drives that enthusiasm, the fear of missing out because of what's being broadcast and what's being, I suppose, suggested by the economists and the gurus, and in this case, a Reserve Bank analysis based on super low interest rates.
Yeah, and look, the Reserve Bank, they do need to adopt a more conservative position than I guess other real estate people that may look to talk up the market or to be a bit more optimistic about it. So, and I would have thought if our market continues in WA the way that it currently is, I think hands down we'd be looking at 30% over 3 years. And if you average that at 10% per year, I'm sure the next lot of data that comes out, and definitely the data at the end of this year, will show an increase far greater than 10% in the previous 12 months. So, yeah, there's no question. The fear of missing out, look, that's definitely prevalent both in the sales market, even more so in the rental market. But the difference there is that in the rental market, people have got the fear of missing out, so they need to find maybe an extra $10 or $20 a week. Sometimes they'll pay an extra $50 a week just to get that rental property because of the fear of missing out. When you look at that in the sales market, though, sometimes they might find an extra $5,000 or $10,000 to make sure that they don't miss out on that one property. But we have also seen, sometimes, and a lot more in the eastern states, I would say, than what we have here in WA. But people will pay $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 more than the asking price just to make sure that they don't miss out on the property. So, and I think there was a stat going back not more than 2 months ago. One of the very well-known auctioneers in the eastern states who operates out of Sydney, I think it's Sydney, and he had sold 10 properties by auction over the weekend, and three of those properties sold above reserve by more than $500,000. So that's craziness, and that's not healthy. We actually don't want to see that level of craziness in the marketplace. I doubt that we'd ever see that sort of craziness here in WA, but certainly offering more than the asking price is a pretty common thing in the current market.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. With regard to that and your snapshot, the rental market, we've got the moratorium in place. However, that's coming to an end in March. And as we said at the outset, and while I have the opportunity, if you are following this program, or if you've got friends or you've got family that have some questions, join us on our live chat line. You can send the comments, and I've got it up here on the screen. And we can, if you've got some questions to ask us, you're more than welcome. It costs nothing. They're independent views. We're not sponsored. We're not supported by any other business other than our own individual businesses. And we're here just to provide something that we have a passion about. So if you have some questions, fire away and we'll see if we can't discover them. Getting back to Oscar. So with the rental moratorium, what's it all mean? What's that all going to happen, and what impact is that going to have with regard to both our tenants and our landlords?
Yeah, so back on the 28th of March last year, the government introduced a moratorium on evictions, and that basically was to ensure that those people that are affected by COVID and therefore their household income and ability to pay rent, if they are affected by COVID, and this bearing in mind, was something that within the first month of COVID that the government, federal and state, came up with this plan. And that was a moratorium on evictions, which basically said for 6 months from the start of COVID, no evictions are going to be able to occur as a result of COVID-related distress. Then at the end of September, I think it was, only 2 or 3 weeks out, as the government realised that 6-month date is now approaching, then they thought, gee, we haven't really done anything about this. Let's just extend it for another 6 months. And that took that to 5 or 6 weeks away from where we are now, to the very end of March, or rather, I think it's the 28th or 29th of March. Aside from the moratorium on evictions, there's other conditions within that moratorium, and one of them prevents rental increases for those tenants that are currently in rental properties. So what's that's done since the inception of the moratorium, which is almost 12 months ago, it's put a lid on natural market forces for rental properties, and therefore the rental prices for these rental properties over the period of the entire moratorium. That's only for tenants that are currently in a rental property. If a tenant vacated a rental property and then the owner took that property and went to put it back on the market and see who the next tenant's going to be, they could do what they want. The rent could go up or down. But for those tenants that were sitting tenants, there were no rental increases allowed over that 12-month period, which again finishes at the end of March this year. Even if they were scheduled increases, it might have been a fixed increase of $20 a week or a market rent review, there were no rental increases allowed whatsoever. So aside from the short supply that we've got in rental properties, because that would have happened anyway, we just have had a short supply of rental properties and therefore forming the rental crisis. But aside from that, because we just don't have enough properties to fill the demand for rentals, that's placed an upward pressure on market values so far as weekly rentals are concerned. But as I just said, with all those properties that have had tenants in them, which is just about every single property, um, we haven't been able to increase rents to current market levels. Now, the market absolutely, most certainly has moved in the last 6 months, if not the last 12 months, and it's moved in an upward direction. So come the end of the moratorium period on the 29th of March, the real estate agents and the private landlords are then able to increase their rents so long as the lease itself doesn't prevent that. So if they are on a periodic tenancy, which basically means a month by month tenancy, they're going to be able to increase the rent. If there were any rental increases that were due over the last 12 months that weren't allowed to happen because of the moratorium, after the end of the moratorium period, those rental increases can now come into effect. And so far as the evictions on moratorium, well, that actually the eviction moratorium, well, that gets lifted as well, which means that if people aren't doing the right thing with the rental properties, whether or not their income is affected by COVID, if they're not paying the rent, if they're behind in their rent, if they're not treating the property well, that gives the landlord or the property manager the right to take action, and that will either be a breach on the lease because they're not complying with the obligations, or they can in fact move to terminate the lease and then put the property back on the market and find themselves a new tenant. So there's been a lot in the news just over the last week or two, mostly from tenants and tenants that know that this date is approaching. In short terms, the market that we've got at the moment is actually quite attractive for the landlords so far as earning a return on their investment, and it's not very good at all. It's quite dire for tenants in the marketplace. So it's not going to be fun really for anyone, because even if there are evictions, even if there are going to be rental increases, and people are going to have to pay more money for their current rentals, that's not really a fun conversation to have with anyone. And it's going to be quite challenging for landlords and property managers to get the rent for the property that it rightly should, given the current market conditions.
What should so it being a tenant, I'll go back one step. So with regard to what you're talking about as far as rent's concerned and rental increases, if I have got a lease that doesn't expire, that's still current, and I've been paying my rent and doing all the right things, however my lease doesn't expire till June.
Yep.
So my position come the end of March when it comes to rental increases cannot be affected until that that lease is due for renewal, or I renew that lease in June. Yep.
Correct.
Okay.
So if you've got what we term a fixed term lease, so
Yes.
if it expires in June, like you said, that would be considered a fixed term lease. And if there were no rental increases due over the whole entire length of the lease, then there is it gives no rise for a rental increase, which means that you're safe up until the lease expiry, so far as a rental increase is concerned.
Sure. And so being a tenant, what would you suggest the tenant should be doing at this point rather than waiting till the end of March, whatever their circumstances? What are the different circumstances that may apply, and what should they be considering or addressing now? Or is that something that the property manager will instigate?
It can be instigated by either party, and I do know, just with a couple of other offices that I work with, that 5 or 6 weeks away is not a lot of time at all. So already those conversations are happening between the landlord, the property manager, and the tenant as to, guess what, if that property was available today in the current market, it would be worth more, maybe $20, $10 a week more, maybe $40 or $50 a week more. So they basically try and formulate an agreement now as to what's going to happen at the end of that moratorium period. So that can be instigated by the landlord or the property manager, or in fact the tenant. So in terms of my advice to tenants is, whether your lease is on a periodic currently or whether it expires in June, as you used in your example, I'd probably start the conversation with the landlord or the property manager now and try and work out at the end of your certain period, or at the end of your fixed term period, what does the landscape look like? You know, are we looking at a rental increase? Do we want to try and instead of seeing out that lease that goes through till the end of June, which we can do, or if the tenant wants lease rental, a security over their rental, they might say, well, look, what about if we look at a lease extension from now, or let's do a new lease from now? So the tenant can absolutely instigate that conversation with the property manager or with the landlord. No party's actually required to do anything though until the lease expires, but a bit of proactivity and a bit of common sense at the moment is really worthwhile, because it takes that feeling of FOMO, the fear of missing out, it takes that out of the equation, because you've got some certainty as to what's going to happen with your rental property.
Yep. And what about the landlords? What should they be doing? Where are they at in this climate? What should they be considering?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, landlords at the end of the day, landlords have got these rental properties, these investment properties, because ultimately they need these properties to go up in value, whether it's an investment, whether it's going to be a retirement plan for them, whether it's going to be a nest egg or something to pass on to the kids or the grandkids. So most rental properties have got that sort of a mandate with it, I guess, or the intention behind it, and that is for these properties to ultimately make money. So in order for landlords to satisfy, I guess, their investment criteria, they need to be achieving what is a fair market rent in the current market. Now, it's probably worth mentioning, over the last 5 years in particular, it hasn't been a landlord's market the way that we've got it now. No. Landlords have been doing it really, really tough. They've had low rents. When there's rent reviews, typically the rents would go down, and often if the properties were vacant, they'd have vacancy periods of 4, 5, 6 weeks, sometimes even a few months. So the conditions that we've got today is not the way that it was 2 or 3 years ago, and they've had a really long run and a hard road. Not only have they been faced with that, but the actual value of their properties have probably gone backwards as well. So now the shoe is on the other foot, and now these market conditions are in favourable of the landlord. They're probably going to get some capital growth out of their property, but they also need to achieve a rental return in line with what the current market parameters suggest. So with landlords that I've been talking to, with some offices that I've done some work with recently as well, where lease renewals would have come up, say, anytime over the last couple of months, instead of actioning those lease renewals now, I've been advising landlords to just sit tight, just let those become month-by-month agreements until we know that this moratorium period has finished, and then we can look to actually renegotiate a lease even with the current tenant. There's no reason to offload a good tenant. So renegotiate a lease with the current tenant, and if they don't want to renegotiate, that's fine. There'll always be plenty of other tenants as well. And by doing that, the landlord will be able to renegotiate a lease after the expiration of the moratorium period. Because if they did it now, they're going to be hamstrung by the fact that they're not allowed to increase the rent as at today because they've got an existing tenant.
And of course the issue that's going to be here, I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying as far as landlords, and it's not just what we're saying, it is a fact. But there's also going to be a massive impact, of course, for those that are doing it hard, and already that's been well documented, and there's been obviously various non-profit organisations and various bodies that support that sort of thing, and I understand that. But of course, it's a bit like a business, isn't it? Some people, when it comes to investment property, and I'm talking about the landlords, the investors, it's part of their portfolio, and I think as difficult as it sometimes may be, the landlords and the investor as such, they're not a charity. And sometimes I sort of feel as though the way it's been exposed and the way it's sort of described in the papers, for example, it's as though, I accept there's the poor me attitude, but I sort of got to think that the landlords and the investors are not a charity either. They are the ones who've taken the risk. They're the ones in a lot of cases have borrowed money. They're the ones who are paying for when things need to be repaired, etc. So it's got to go both ways. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
That's a contradiction of terms. You can't have it both ways. And I think the landlord, up until this current marketplace for the last few years, as you said, the landlords have done it tough, but also the tenants have benefited. There's been a lot of focus around the tenants and even the rents that are being charged. So I think it's sort of what goes around comes around sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think, by and large, landlords aren't a charity, but landlords, they're not a big, 600-pound gorilla either. And they're not all bad guys. And I dare say the majority of landlords are people, they're humans, they're family people, and they might be tenants themselves, or they've got mortgages to pay as well. So a mortgage is, just another way of paying a weekly sum off the house that you're living in. The only thing being is that you're paying it straight to the bank and maybe a bit more to the bank than what you would in terms of rent. But with the landlords that I deal with, I'm trying to think, would I say largely or just about every single landlord that I deal with, there is a level of empathy that comes from the landlord. For example, if we've got a rental property that has been paying $400 a week over the last 12 months, excuse me, but in today's market, it's definitely worth $450 a week. And this is actually a real life example. A landlord, come the end of the moratorium period, can propose to up that rent from $400 a week straight to $450 a week. Or if the tenant has been doing the right thing and has been keeping the place well and looked after the gardens, paid their rent on time, just the fundamental basics of being a good tenant, the landlord might go via their property manager, might go and say, look, it's worth $450 today, but you've been a good tenant. What about we make it just $430? Let's just have an increase of $30 a week as opposed to $50 a week. Of which, and if that gets explained to the tenant, and if I was the tenant, I'd be sitting there going, oh, wow, that's great, because if I don't accept that, then I need to go and find myself another rental property, and chances are for the same property, I'm going to be paying an extra $50 a week. I'll probably be up against another 10 or 15 people for the same property as well. So I think it can absolutely work both ways, a bit of empathy both ways. Or an alternative is, look, it is worth $450 a week today. If you're signing a new 12-month lease, what about we just increase it to $425 for the first 6 months, and the second 6 months we'll make it $450 a week, and then at the end of the 12 months we'll wait and see where we sit. So my view is that landlords should have a level of empathy towards the existing tenants, and in most cases it's not really that much of a hard sell for the property manager to I guess deal with the landlord or discuss that as an option with the landlord. So
I suppose we talk about that empathy, but we also talk about the fact of the tenant who's going, well, we've already been aware, and you're certainly aware of it as well, and we've spoken about it. There are situations now where people are going, rent is worth $450, and people, because they're so desperate, and the old FMO again, fear of missing out, FOMO, the situation being is they're offering more than the asking price. So the tenants out there, or the prospective tenants out there, are driving the price. So it's not always the landlord; it's the people desperate to get a property. And
absolutely.
so that's an element of risk that you're taking. You're joining the queue, and it may not be the landlord that's driving the price. It may simply be the volume, the supply and demand. As simple as that.
Yeah, look, it'll be the next. I've got a pretty good idea as to what will happen in the market over the next 4 to 6 weeks, and I dare say that would be the same over the last 4 to 6 weeks. What will be very interesting though is what April and May looks like, and we'll obviously follow that very closely in terms of not what we think is going to happen, but what's actually happening now on the ground, so far as any evictions that might happen because tenants have not kept up with their rental payments. rental increases. We'll know exactly what's happening, because we're dealing in that sort of stuff day to day as well. So that'll be over April and May that we actually see, exactly what's going on. But something else the other thing I was going to mention, and you mentioned it at the start, and that is the rental grants that were available, and you mentioned to
I was
landlords.
just going to raise that there.
Yeah, okay. Well, if you do your quick intro to that, and I'll then give you a bit of my thought on that.
So what it was, there's an article that I picked up on it. The WA government will be expanding the application for its residential rent relief grant scheme to incentivize landlords who maintain tenancies and avoid restrictions post March 2021. What happened was the WA government and the Attorney General and the Commerce Minister, John Quigley, and State Treasurer, Ben Wyatt, explained that the unspent funds will be repurposed to provide landlords with direct one-off payments equivalent to 75% of the accrued rent arrears. Right? So they will be so the landlords will get a direct one-off equivalent to 75% of the accrued rent incurred during the emergency period, but only up to a maximum of $4,000. Right?
Right.
So, and that will also include any rent that was waived or deferred during the emergency. So there's an application process which we'll have to follow up on. Mr. White said a key condition of landlords receiving the funding is that a fixed term agreement of 6 months or longer is entered into with the existing tenant at a reasonable rent that is affordable.
Right. Okay. So
does that make sense?
It does make sense, and everything you've just read to me there is brand new information to me, so I wasn't aware. So when has the state government come and made that announcement, TV?
Only in the last couple of days, and the situation is there are also a number of criteria that tenants must also fulfil, right? And if they wish to apply for the new grant scheme, with the new grant scheme taking applications from now until June 2021.
Right. Okay.
All right.
So the way that it worked previously and prior to that announcement of the last couple of days is that if a tenant was falling behind in rent, then they'd be able to apply to state government effectively or Treasury for rent relief up to the value of 4 weeks' rent to a maximum of $2,000, and that would offset rent arrears if they could prove financial hardship, and that money would go straight to the landlord against any incurred arrears. So what they've done now, and I'm interpreting this as I go, but it sounds like a really smart idea, and it is the government's response to March 29. It's open slather so far as evictions are concerned for people that aren't paying rent. But as an incentive to the landlords, excuse me, as an incentive to the landlords to not evict the tenants, the government is taking that unused money, as you said, and crediting the landlords for up to 75% of the arrears that have been incurred to a maximum value of $4,000, so long as they don't evict the tenant and they enter into a new minimum 6-month fixed term agreement at a fair market rent, I guess. And that probably and hopefully may be in addition to the $2,000 capped grant that the tenant could apply for as well. So if I've interpreted that correctly, and I think I probably have, I think that's an outstanding policy. Really, a really good use of that money that obviously has already been budgeted for. I think it's fantastic, and it's going to be a great answer to tenants that are currently worried that have built up rent arrears through this COVID period and are worried that in 5 or 6 weeks' time they're going to be hit with an eviction notice. That there actually is a very good lifeline there that is available to the landlords. The only thing that I would say is that I just hope that the criteria and application process for these grants isn't having to jump through 45 or 50 different hoops, because if that drags on for too long and it's too complicated, then landlords just won't take up the offer, and because it's not worth their time. It'd be easier for them to evict a non-paying tenant and just look for a new tenant that would actually be paying the fair market rent. So in order to make it attractive for the landlord and to incentivize them, it needs to be a pretty quick process.
One of our regulars and also one of our guests, who I'm trying to lock him in to come on board again, is one Justin Collins from Aviso Insurance, and he said maybe we get the treasurer might come online and explain it to us.
Oh, JC, that's a great idea, mate, and I'm sure he will. Maybe we can. In fact, if you've got his,
that big, he'll just jump at the chance.
JC, if you've got his number, mate, maybe you can just text him, yeah, see if he might, if maybe he might be free next Tuesday.
Yep, there's just a couple of little grey-haired fellas would like to have a chat to him about the new incentive for the tenants and the landlords. Great idea. We're going big. We're going big. We're now going to the treasurer. Next, it'll be
Look, just on that though, and as you said, it's a brand new initiative. I don't know if they need to get that passed in the House, but conceptually, I think it's a great idea. And by next week, there'll obviously be a lot more coverage of it, and I'll do a bit of homework on it myself. And I'll dye my hair black and put on my glasses so that I look like Ben Wyatt, and I'll explain it to you just in case Ben's not able to attend next week.
And I think we'll also put a little bit of a post on our respective social media pages. So for those that aren't aware, there's a Property Avenue WA page. And by the way, whenever I try to get dedicated property management, you know how you highlight them and they come up in the screen. It doesn't happen when Property Avenue WA. So obviously dedicated property management hasn't liked Property Avenue WA, I'm guessing. I don't know why that happens.
Yeah, it's either that, mate, or maybe I've just blocked you.
Anyway, we'll put some info on our respective pages, and particularly Property Avenue WA and our own respective business pages. And if may just help people that are trying to find out more information, because I only came across it by chance, and then I went, "Wow, that's
shocking, though. That's shocking that you've only come across it by chance. It's news. It's news to me, and if it's only the last couple of days, I've had a pretty busy last couple of days. But I would have thought there'd be a lot more coverage of it already, because that's a really, really smart policy and a really good use of that money.
I found it online. It's not. I haven't seen it. I certainly haven't seen it in the real estate pages of the West Australian. I certainly haven't seen it in the Age or the Herald or any other pages. And I read lots of stuff, you know, all the various paperwork. And so I'm really surprised. And looking at this, it looks like it was actually done a bit earlier than that. I've only come across it the last couple of days. Looks like it was sort of done early in January, so like earlier in the month, the last couple of weeks or so.
This is the first I've heard of it, and that's absolutely not something to keep a secret. That's a really, really, I think it's a really well thought out policy, and I hope they implement it. And again, I hope that they don't make it a ridiculous number of hoops to jump through, because that will detract from how attractive it is at face value. So at face value, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. So that's it with regard to the rental. Are there any other things that you would consider that while on rental that you would suggest in what we're talking about at the moment, as far as the rental market, landlords, investors? What about investors, people that are considering buying at the moment? Is it going to impact on them?
Yeah. Is it going to? Yeah, it is going to impact on them. And I know that we've been talking about for the last 2 months, maybe 3 months, about investors is definitely back into the market, for the reasons being that WA's got low values in comparison to the eastern states. Our rental market is as tight as ever, and our interest rates are as low as they've ever been in living memory. So that makes for a very, very good property investment market. However, I think his name's Tim Lawless, the head research analyst at CoreLogic, was on the news just this morning and talking about the Federal Reserve's prediction for 30% capital growth across the board over the next 3 years. And he made a comment about investors are just nowhere to be seen in the market. and that 100% is a Eastern States-based comment that
Yes.
someone on the national news comes out, and he's a great guy by the way, and very knowledgeable. But when someone comes out and makes a comment that investors there's just none around, and you can't find them, there's just crickets. Well, that's not the case at all in WA. And the amount of the increase in investor interest, I reckon, just even in the last 4 to 8 weeks, has been very, very high for all the reasons that we just mentioned before. So WA has got a very, very strong market, and I really think that will continue as well, because those three factors of low prices, low interest rates, and a very tight rental market, I can't really see any of that changing anytime soon, and certainly not if you've got banks that are offering 20-year fixed term 0% interest rates.
Yep.
Like what you mentioned before.
we know personally our own little circle, what we've experienced with investors. So it's somewhat surprising, because we've certainly seen, just as I say, with what we do on a day-by-day basis, we've seen a significant increased improvement in that area. So yeah, it is somewhat surprising, but maybe the enthusiasm with the Reserve Bank analysis of 30% over the next 3 years might change people's attitudes. But certainly WA is concerned, it's affordable rates and there's opportunity, and that certainly seems to be driving the marketplace here in WA.
Yeah, and look, I mean, we've only spoken about real estate and those factors that are putting pressure on the real estate market, but we haven't really looked outside of real estate and all the other sectors of the WA economy that are making us a bit of a powerhouse. We haven't touched on mining and the record price that iron ore is achieving as well, and how reliant our state is, or our state's economy is, on iron ore exports. So it's pretty much boom time, I think.
I've got to tell you, I came across an article. I wish I probably did keep it somewhere, because I do that sort of thing. But there was an article about an analysis, and the big question mark that they have raised in this article in the last few days that I read was the Big C. It was all about China. It was about China, and I thought, oh no, Oscar's been ahead of that for some time. I thought you'd written the article for a minute. It was very funny.
It's so true though, mate. Look, it is true, and COVID's not going away, so that's going to be a big C word over the course of this year as well. But China, I think, in terms of, if COVID just maintains the level that it's at now, the big C word really is going to be China and trade relations with China over this coming year.
Yep. And talking about the big C word, digressing slightly, but don't mention the cricket.
Mate, I only caught the the tail end of what was this morning was meant to be an absolutely unthinkable, almost impossible task. But did my fellow Indian brothers
don't forget, it was their third 11, because they've lost that many players. It wasn't even their top 11. I mean, it was nowhere. There was a thing the other day that they showed up on screen, player for player. If you cross out the respective blokes, if you saw who we missed out in our team, there's no one in the world we would have been able to compete with what the Indians do. So, yes, I'll give you credit to you and your brothers. It was an amazing result.
Did you get to watch any of it?
Anyway, yeah, no, it was incredible. Hey, something about another thing that caught my interest, although it's not WA, this article, which I found most intriguing, because I'm a bit of a property. I've become really sort of wrapped up in all this stuff. But there was an article here that I just really tickled my fancy, and it was regarding Denmark, overseas Denmark, and that is the country with the longest history of negative central bank rates is offering homeowners 20-year loans at a fixed interest rate of 0. True story. And
mate,
apparently, hey, go on.
What's the other criteria though with that? Like, it must be sizable deposit.
I didn't have a look at the criteria. I was just impressed with the article, And apparently, back in 2012, the policymakers drove their main rate below zero to defend the kroner's peg to the euro. And since then, Danish homeowners have enjoyed continuous slides in borrowing costs. So I don't think there's a specific criteria. I think that's what they're doing. The bank of, what's the bank? Nordea Bank. Nordea
No,
Bank.
I mean the zero fixed percent is blind Freddy, dead Freddy to even have a crack at that. But and you'd lock it in for as long as you could. But the criteria I was talking about is your equity contribution, your
Oh yeah,
LVR.
I understand what you're saying, but there was no reference with regard to that. But the Danish lenders first issued 20-year bonds with 0% coupons a few years ago, as investors looking for a safe place to park their money drove down rates.
Mm.
There was no reference to criteria, but this is the first time that such a product is returned to the shelves. 0% for 20 years.
Insane, mate.
That is amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
And it's a bit, yeah. Anyway, I thought it was a very interesting article, a headline, and I will continue to look for some interesting headlines around the world when it comes to matters property. I just thought we'd be a bit different. I don't know whether I've got too many other things to discuss other than the fact. Have you got any other points you want to raise?
I just looked at the time, and
I know.
so
Well,
that's the only point I've got to raise.
I thought I'd got. I think we should about time we came to an end, and so I figured we always finish with an if question. And the if question this week, and I'm giving you without notice. If you could clone yourself, right? If you could clone yourself, so two of you, what characteristic would you not be a part of your clone? So
what characteristic?
And so what is it? What part of you? What is your characteristic that you would say no, I wouldn't include that in my clone?
Can it be a physical characteristic?
Hey, could be whatever you want to do. Whatever you're the one who's answering the question. There's no right, there's no wrong. It's just a question I thought I'd ask, an if question.
All right. So
I've reshuffled the question I read earlier. That's okay.
So I reckon I would not make. I was going to say something about the grey hair, but grey hair can be dealt with because it can always be.
I a lot of money for this coloured hair. You know that?
I don't know, that I wasn't so hairy.
So your clone wouldn't be as hairy.
Yeah, that's right. What about you, mate?
I'm thinking
the same hairy.
Oh no, that's not. I don't have an issue there. What characteristic?
Well, you need to have a look in the mirror, mate, because you do have an issue.
No, it's okay. It's still there at my age, mate. I joined the pension club next week.
I reckon if you comb your hair maybe the way that I've combed mine, you might have a bit of a Donald Trump little
please, that's another topic. My characteristic, I'd probably consider time management.
Oh, right.
Time management. Time management's not a strength of mine. I just do what I do. I fit it all in. They say always get a busy person to do it for you. Well, yeah, okay. It might help if I'm a bit organised, but anyway, time management, I reckon, is a characteristic that's a big flaw in my world. But I'm probably at a stage in my life where it doesn't really matter anymore.
Well, it's not going to change.
No. I enjoy talking, so I keep that characteristic.
You enjoy talking, mate.
I love it, chat. I love it, chat.
You.
Hey, listen, it's been a pleasure once again. I really enjoyed and I appreciate you conveying your expertise and your knowledge. And how is business with dedicated property management? You happy with how you're progressing?
Yeah, really happy, mate. Look, it's going a little bit slower than what I would hope it to, but that's probably because I set pretty high targets, and also it's not just a new business, but it's also a brand new brand. So if I had joined a franchise or something like that has got a recognised, reputable, trusted brand, then that would probably make a positive difference. That said, I'm pretty happy with where it is at. I've got a couple of bigger things on the go at the moment, and really, I'm not even 3 months in. I really don't have any complaints, mate. I know that I'm absolutely in the right space, and I'm loving what I'm doing. So,
Well,
thanks for asking.
paying a lot of sponsorship, paying a lot of money for your sponsorship of Property Avenue WA. So
Yeah.
that's probably helping, and that's huge. By
Yeah,
the way,
it is.
we did get Ben White's Twitter account details.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's all good. We'll be in touch with Ben and ask him via Twitter what's his thoughts on the new government incentive for rental arrears. Mate, been a pleasure. Absolutely enjoyed the opportunity and look forward to doing it again next week. And
Fantastic.
for those that are listening, even if we are about to finish up, but you're always welcome to ask questions via our social media pages. And Justin Collins just said he sent Ben a tweet, so he knows him first name terms. So we're all going. But thank you for joining us.
Before you go, just had a quick thought. Next Tuesday is Australia Day, which means I don't know whether we'll do the show. We probably wouldn't do it on Australia Day, so we might need to put some thought into when we will do it if we don't do it on next Tuesday, the public holiday.
Yeah, okay. We'll touch base and watch this space as to what we do. Yeah, I totally agree. It's probably not going to work, so we might have to rejig it. But we'll ensure we let everybody know what's going on. Mate, thanks again, and to all our listeners, stay safe and keep cool in this weather here in WA. For those of the East Coast, it's a great place, WA. You should invest in it. It's really worth it. But we enjoy doing what we're doing. Keep sending your questions, and we will talk to you next week at some stage. Take care.